A lot of adults walking around right now were emotionally abused as children and have absolutely no idea. Not because they're in denial, but because nobody ever sat them down and told them what it was. It didn't leave marks anyone could see, it just left them, anxious in ways they can't fully explain, exhausted by relationships that should feel easy, convinced somewhere deep down that they are fundamentally too much or not nearly enough. If that sounds familiar, stay with this. The first thing emotional abuse does to a child is teach them that their emotions are a problem, not through one conversation, through 100 small moments where crying got them mocked, fear got them dismissed, and anger, their anger at least, was called disrespectful, while the adult's anger got to fill every room in the house. So the child learns to go quiet inside. They tuck everything down and get so good at it that 20 years later, they sit in a therapist's office and genuinely cannot answer the question, how does that make you feel? Not because they're being difficult, but because they trained themselves out of knowing. And underneath that, most of them grew up inside love that had conditions attached to it. Affection that showed up when they were easy and agreeable and performing well, and disappeared the moment they struggled or needed something or failed. That is not a small thing to grow up inside, because what it teaches a child isn't just that this particular parent is inconsistent, it teaches them that love itself is a reward, that you earn it or you lose it. And that belief doesn't stay in the house where it was born. It follows people into every relationship they try to build as adults and quietly destroys things that could have been good. If something in this already feels like it was written about you, you're exactly who Mind Blossom is for. Subscribe and stay. There's something else that happens in these homes that almost nobody talks about. The child stops being allowed to say no. Not in a dramatic way, just steadily, consistently, their discomfort gets dismissed, their limits get talked over, what they want comes last or doesn't come at all. And children who grow up like that don't become adults who understand boundaries. They become adults who feel physically guilty every time they try to hold one, who say yes when their whole body is screaming no, because the last time they tried to say no, they learned what it cost. Some of them also grew up being endlessly compared to siblings, to cousins, to some imaginary version of themselves that lived inside their parents' expectations and was apparently always just slightly better than whoever they actually were. Comparison like that doesn't just sting in the moment, it installs something, a measuring voice that follows them into adulthood and sounds so much like their own thoughts that they never even question where it came from. And then there are the ones who became the emotional caretaker of their own home, the child who knew how to read a room the second they walked in, who could feel the difference between a safe silence and a dangerous one, who managed and adjusted and made themselves useful or invisible depending on what the adults in that house needed that day. Therapists call this parentification. What it produces is an adult who is exceptional at holding everyone else together and completely lost when it comes to asking for anything for themselves, because for most of their childhood, their needs simply weren't the priority. All of it, every single pattern, tends to produce the same result in the end. A person who moves through the world feeling like a burden, not because anyone necessarily said those words directly to their face, but because it lived in the sighs, the eye rolls, the way their needs were treated like inconveniences, because they were threats of withdrawal, of leaving, of consequences that made a child understand their presence was something that could be taken away. Children absorb all of that, every last bit of it. And what they absorb becomes what they believe about themselves long after they've left that house and built an entirely different life. The reason so many people never had a name for this is simple. From inside it, it just felt like childhood. It felt like how things were. You had nothing to compare it to, and the people causing it were the same people you depended on to survive. So your brain protected you by filing it under normal. But you are allowed to pick that file back up now and look at it differently. Understanding this isn't about destroying your past or turning the people who raised you into villains. It's about finally having an explanation for things inside you that never made sense before. The anxiety that shows up in safe relationships, the guilt that arrives whenever you rest, the exhaustion of loving people who have given you absolutely no reason to be afraid of them. You didn't build those things alone, and you don't have to carry them alone either. This video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health support. If this brought something up, please reach out to someone qualified to help you work through it. Subscribe to Mind Blossom, a quiet place for your mind, soul, and heart.